recording. Here we are.
Okay, got it. Okay.
Okay, so it's 12:01 and we have 24.
Oh, okay, cool. Whatever. It is what it is.
Yeah. Hi, everybody. Welcome. Really pleased to have Bob Putnam with me today. And we were a lot of people on today, so I'm trying to juggle two things. I'm not, you know what, I had this formal introduction, but Bob and I were working on revamping the poll we had set up on Friday. So first, let me tell you, just personally, I'm so pleased because we have known each other from easily the 1980s, which dates us, unfortunately, Bob. Also, I'd forgotten until recently, though we'd gotten together over ABA and PBIS a few years ago, pre-COVID, right? Over some concerns about PBIS, which we felt, you know, people need to work it through, right? And you were very helpful and brought in terms of that issue with, staff. But you have, you have over, I don't know, I had the formal number of articles, books, and periodicals, but at your PhD, you've been practicing psychologist for all that time, all the time I've known you. And you've been with May Institute for most of that time, and you're sort of the national authority on PBS. You consult the schools all over the country. You're an expert witness. We were talking about a case in Georgia recently that's going to make a huge difference for people's education. And we share the strong belief that positive behavioral supports can make a difference across the board in helping staff learn, but also then having participants really develop and grow. So, you know, I gave you, I should have given you the formal one, Bob. Maybe you can add a little bit while I try to redo the poll we just did, since it's telling me I'm not the same person I was when I entered the room. I don't get that, but maybe someone took hosting away from me and I don't know it. So I'm checking that out. Oh, you know what? Maybe I have to be the ARC Massachusetts again. I don't know, but we'll figure it out in a minute. But okay. Bob, you want to just share some more about you, or we're going to have to do the polling in an old-fashioned way?
Yeah. No, I'll share a little bit. I actually started working in the field of developmental disabilities in the 70s. I actually started my professional career in state institution for individuals with IDD. In the early 70s, Devastate School, and then worked in private schools for a while. And then for the last, since probably about 1988, have consulted to schools and organizations around behavior support. And used to basically have a SPED director call me and say, can you go in and work with Jimmy in this classroom? And I would go in and see the teacher, and the teacher would say, well, I know you're here because of Jimmy's mother, but I have 4 other kids that have just as many challenging issues. And I began to think about how we can do this on a systems level. So, began to work in classrooms and then in host schools and districts, and actually have went up to the state of Vermont and helped build their PBS system. When I first went up there and trained the state team, they said, well, we probably have like 5 schools that be interested. I said, you should prepare for 50. And they now have like 175 schools up in Vermont that are doing PBS. So, so I'm pleased to see so many people here. And Leo and I do go back. I was trying to figure out, it's probably about 25 years. Leo looks about the same. I look a little different. And basically, if you're from the state of Massachusetts, you need to give a big high five to Leo, because Leo has been an amazing advocate during all those years that he's worked for the state ARC. A lot of the services we have in Massachusetts kind of take for granted. And since I do some work nationally and actually have students that come all over the country, it's amazing these services that we have in Massachusetts. And a lot of that is from Leo's tireless advocacy pouring over budget sheets to make sure that we get the right allocations and funding to support our individuals. So big shout out to Leo.
Thank you, Bob, and really appreciate that. Hey, good news. People are seeing the poll.
Okay.
Diane, Glenn, right? Everybody sees the poll. So the only problem, remember I told you I had a hitch finishing that last question. For some reason, it folded on me, wouldn't allow me the full choices. So we might have to ask people to raise hands if they're here and focused on high school first and then adults second. So I don't know how you want to, but otherwise you're going to see maybe, I don't know when we're going to see it once people finish the poll, since I can't get to it. Unless I change identities, maybe I have to change identities. Kerry, can you get to the poll?
And I can't complete the poll because it only wants.
Oh, sorry. Yeah, I'm trying to get to the poll, but
Okay.
I'm just the co-host, so I didn't screw it up.
No, I know you didn't. No, I trust me. I changed who I was. I don't know how renaming me changes it, but sorry, I'm getting irrelevant. We're taking time away from this great presentation.
And
So
we can't submit if they're older than junior or middle school.
no, that's what I just said, Diane. I said people are going to raise their hands once they submit. Why don't you? Why doesn't everybody
can't
submit the poll?
We
Why?
cannot submit unless we pick one of those two choices.
Yeah,
that
well,
says you have to
lie.
answer this.
Lie and
Okay.
we'll subtract. So everyone who can't finish it, say your say your children or earlier, right? Elementary or earlier, and then we'll subtract that. So everyone do the same thing, so we can subtract that number from that total. Okay, does that seem fair? And we've got 56 people. So,
Okay.
and I know we'll have a lot more once we put it up as a recording. So could we just do that? I think that's the way to go. And then please submit.
Yeah, we have 39 people have participated so far.
Okay, and we're going to stop it. That's okay, Caroline. So you picked a different choice. We'll subtract it from that choice. Thank you. And if someone else did that, we call that proactive. So even though it wasn't the choice I just said, you were still proactive. So, okay, Diane did it too.
Actually,
George can too. Okay.
Patricia has her hand up.
Okay.
Oh, I thought we were doing that if we work with adults.
Yeah, so what I'm going to suggest, first, let's do high school. Pick your hands up. And then so Bob can see and I can see. How many do we have? And keep it up for a minute so we can count them. Any high schools? No, I don't see any hands up for high school. Okay. Oh, now I do. 1, 2, 3. Okay, so I should be more patient, I guess, Bob and Kerry. 4. All right, okay, could everybody drop their hands now? So that's 4. And then why doesn't everybody raise your hand for adults? And don't raise it if you already told me that you picked middle school, because I'm going to just take that off, okay? So just raise your hand if you didn't pick middle school and you picked early childhood. Okay, so there's 7, and then plus the hands raised. Wow, most are adults, Bob.
Okay, cool.
Right.
Well, I'll
And then
focus on
there's-
adults.
And
Yep.
and Chris still says she works with all ages. Okay, which is great. Okay.
And can we finish up the poll, Leo? So
Yeah, let's
we-
close up the poll. Let's end the poll. Since I can't do it, can you do it, Carrie? Well, I guess I learned something every time. I don't know what I can say.
I just ended the poll and I'm sharing the results.
Okay, you're awesome and
Okay, cool. All right.
all right.
So we got about a third of the audience is caregivers, about half the audience is professionals, and about 15% are caregiver and professional. That's cool. And all of you are from Massachusetts. All right. I love it. I thought we might have some interlopers from other states, but it's great that basically we only have people from Massachusetts. Okay, so I was making this talk Massachusetts centric, so that works in terms of that. So let me bring this up. Everybody can see that? So I work at the May Institute for the last 28 years, and also I'm part of the National Technical Assistance Center for Positive Behavior Interventions and Supports, which is your tax dollars at work, because that's the Department of Education Office of Special Education Programs Center for basically behavioral support, disabilities, social emotional issues. And I'm also part of the National Autism Center. So we've got the Zoom poll. So I can't see the chat. So if you have questions or comments, put them in the chat. And I've already seen some people have some in the chat while we're doing the poll. And Leo will be moderating the chat, posing questions for me either during the presentation or at the end of the presentation, depending on what he thinks that would help the presentation. So, and so in terms of an organization, it's kind of going over what is PBIS, what is PBS, and the status nationally as well as in Massachusetts. Why is this important to families and staff? How can you get involved in your school or agency? And I have a whole bunch of useful resources around families. So that probably might be the most important thing is the useful resources that I've been able to curate and bring it up to you where all of them are free. So you can use that in terms of helping you work. So oftentimes I get what is positive behavior support, and according to the Center on PBS, it refers to the application of positive behavior interventions and systems to achieve socially important behavior change. So whether we look at the adult system or the school system, the goal in this is how do we achieve socially important behavior change? So we want to ask our schools that what are the important outcomes? And you, as family members or supporting families, we think that's really important to have both the individuals served as well as our families be active participants in terms of kind of what's the most socially important behavior change that you would like to see for your son or daughter. And PBS is not a program. So if you work with a PBS trainer, we're really looking at systems change, whether it's systems change in our adult system or systems change in our school systems. Right. So one is what's going on nationally. Right. So the U.S. Department of Education, back when IDA was first promulgated back in '97, they also developed a definition in terms of PBS, and from their perspective, it's an evidence-based. So we really want to look at what actually works. And when I say what actually works, it's basically if we look at the research, do we have any data evidence that shows what we're trying to achieve, whether it's attending school or wellness? Do we have anything that actually shows some evidence? Or in terms of a school or an agency, we're looking at, do you have some data that shows whatever you're doing actually works as well? And it's a tiered framework, right? In terms of what we're looking at, a multi-tiered framework. And there's an F word in PBS, and the F word is fidelity. So the question always comes from me because I do a lot of these trainings, and people say, oh yeah, we do PBS. And I say, well, do you measure fidelity? And most times it doesn't go up. Hand doesn't go up. So the goal from the research we have, if it's not implemented with fidelity, we're not going to get our maximum outcomes, or we may not get any outcomes at all. Right? So we really want to look at in terms of improving social and emotional competence, academic success and climate. Right? And really it's a way to create positive, predictable, equitable, and safe learning environments.
Bob, can I just, this is my own chat. When you say, I know what you mean by fidelity, but just in case.
Okay, good
And how,
question.
what does it mean, and how do you assess that? Thanks.
Yeah, that's a great question, Leo. All right. So fidelity means we said we do what we said we were going to do. So if we are saying that basically we meant PBS, I mean, how do we measure that what we said we're going to do actually happen, right? And so we have a number of tools, free tools on the National Technical Assistance site that actually measure fidelity. So that, Leo, that's a great question because, you know, so a lot of people say, hey, I'm on a diet, right? And, you know, do we have fidelity with that diet? Or I'm a weight loss program, right? And do I have fidelity with what the weight loss program? Or geez, I get migraines and the doctor intervention, and you know, is it done with fidelity or is it done when people just feel like it? So that's really what we mean by fidelity. So it's really important that we look at in terms of whatever we're going to do, that we implement it with fidelity, because oftentimes people move from one intervention to another because it really hasn't been implemented fidelity. So it's big for us in terms of the PBS world that we look at in terms of trying to measure fidelity. So this is the National Technical Assistance Center for PBS. As I said, this is your tax dollars at work. So there are a lot of briefs that are on this. This is just one brief that's on this website. And we'll talk about some other briefs later on in the presentation. But there are a variety of briefs around supporting individual students, supporting schools, as well as in particular supporting children with disabilities. All right. So this is not, you know, this is not something that Bob and Leo made up. This is actually being done with about a little less than 30,000 schools. And you can see when we first started back in 2001, we had a couple of schools, and we've continually increased the number of schools. I actually have another graph that shows implemented with fidelity. Right? I didn't think we had enough space, but it actually shows how many schools are actually. It's about 10,000 of the schools are actually implementing with fidelity. The others are working towards fidelity. So what's going on in Massachusetts? Since all of you are from Massachusetts, right? So the Department of Elementary and Secondary Education, DESE, has on their website what they call MTSS, which is very similar to PBS. PBS is kind of a part of a multi-tiered system of support. Recently, they just put out new regulations that particularly around exclusionary discipline, and suggesting that the principal, headmaster, or superintendent acting as a decision-making shall implement school or district-wide models to re-engage students in the learning process, which shall include but not be limited to positive behavior interventions and supports. So we have a lot of both legal and regulatory support for PBS. And also the Department of Developmental Disabilities, right? Recently changed their regulations. They actually changed them in February of 2020. And if anybody can remember what happened in March of 2020 was when COVID hit. So they had a really nice rollout process, but you know, COVID, as my wife says, COVID always wins. And so the situation is they've had a delayed rollout, although that's in the regulation. So the previous regulations were around behavior modification, and they really have worked towards moving towards improving quality of life. So, and this is one of the few states, you have to give DDS a lot of credit. This is one of the few states that actually has PBS regulations that focus on quality of life. So they're looking at using this multi-tiered framework to improve quality of life. And so that could be wellness for individuals that are served through DDS, or it could be improved social skills or improved vocational, all kinds of things, improved community integration. So each agency has kind of operationally defines what they mean by quality of life. And they've implemented a multi-tiered framework. When you're seeing, again, evidence-based practices with the F word, right, fidelity. Each agency is supposed to have a representative team, which would be the administrator and then the clinical staff And previously, the clinical staff were just kind of problem solving how to improve quality of life. They've required that the administrator sit on the team, and they are also requiring that individuals or family members sit on the teams. So we'll talk a little bit about what you can do to influence if you have an adult child in one of the DDS organizations in terms of impacting in terms of what they do. And then I'll that in terms of having, particularly around students that have challenging behavior, that agencies need to do a functional behavioral assessment, which is really the standard for working with individuals with challenging behavior. They also defined what they consider to be qualified clinicians. So agencies before could have anyone developing a behavior support plan, and the department has also said people should be qualified to do these. So they've laid out that agencies need to have qualified clinicians. So as I said before, it's designed to move the DDS community from behavior modification to positive behavior supports. And just so you know, PBIS actually emerged from the IDD field. Going back 30 years ago, there was a lot of consequential interventions, punitive interventions for people who had challenging behavior. And really it was looking at in terms of, can we come up with a more nuanced approach where we're looking at in terms of how do we prevent problem behaviors, how do we teach replacement behaviors, and how do we reinforce those replacement behaviors. So it emerged from applied behavioral analysis and the normalization inclusion movement, and then person-centered values. So the way Massachusetts DDS defines it, it's a systematic person-centered approach, which again, it's the first time they've really had that term in their regulations. Before it was behavior modification. And really looking at in terms of, again, evidence-based practices for prevention, proactive intervention, and teaching responding to behavior. I think the most important thing is meaningful social outcomes. So organizations need to define what their meaningful social outcomes. And I work at the May Institute, and we have a lot of individuals that are limited communicators. So one of our meaningful social outcomes is really teaching people to be able to communicate, to be able to advocate for themselves, right? So that they can help us enhance their quality of life. So this is huge for the department to move away from just behavior modification to looking at a person-centered approach that would be enhancing quality of life. So these are some of the things that this is, the department has, I think, about $4 billion worth of services. And Leo can correct me if I'm wrong in terms of that, but I know it's several billions of dollars. So every provider funded by the department, whether you do family support or you do respite or whatever, needs to have a PBS leadership team that includes family members or caregivers or individuals. Because they're really pushing, and we do within PBS is really push for, consumer input in terms of what's going on. So it's not just an isolated team or people in the agency. It's basically really actively involving these folks. And these folks actively are looking at data. So if we're looking at improving quality of life, how do we measure that? And that the leadership team and the family members are actually looking at data to say, how are we measuring this? And how are we improving what we're doing to improve quality of life, right? And then each team needs to have an action plan. So it's not just, in some cases, previously people may have collected data and just admired it, right? This looks really good or not. They really need to have an action plan. And then everyone needs to have at least a universal tier of support, which we'll talk about it in a minute. And then a system of database decision-making, right, for individual treatment. Are we looking at data to see whether people are actually improving in terms of whatever the skills we want them to learn? And the goal in terms of, at the universal level, we're looking at kind of the aggregate of everybody. right? And as we go up the tiers, we're looking at more individualized treatment. Everyone gets individualized treatment, but the goal really is to look at, can we build a system that would be more efficient and effective in terms of achieving our organizational goals. And this is the same thing in schools. We're looking at the same level along those lines.
Bob, before you touch on the universal tier, that's going to be, one of the issues somebody might be thinking is in the adult system, despite, like you said, the rollout never happened because it was February, right? And
Yeah.
weeks later, the shutdown happened. And, you know, people are thinking, well, I can't imagine with everything, the turnover, whatever, that people are doing this. But one of the issues is, does staff retention improve when people are coached in this way? You want to share a little bit about that? So some agency must say, I can't take this on, but if you don't take it on, you're going to lose more people than if you do take it on, correct?
Correct. And one of the PBS outcomes might be staff retention, right? And staff wellness. If the staff aren't well, and, just like all of us have gone through hell the last couple of years, if the staff aren't well, how do we improve the staff wellness and the individual's wellness as well? So that's, part of looking at what we want to do is improving the whole system. And Leo's correct. It's very challenging. The other thing is, if we have more effective interventions for individuals with challenging behavior, then everyone's life becomes a little easier. The individual's life becomes a little easier. The staff life becomes a little easier. If the individuals can better advocate for themselves, then, rather than staff guessing in terms of what people want, then it's an easier way in terms of basically having everyone be well. So agencies can be really creative with this in terms of what would be their meaningful outcomes, and how do we figure out a way in terms of improving what's going on. So for example, in our agency, the May Institute, as I said, we deal with a lot of individuals with challenging behavior and limited communication skills, as we're actually doing a whole screening of the individuals in terms of what their communication skills are, and how do we figure out if at the universal level, are there kind of strategies we can do with certain populations of individuals with who are very limited versus people that are beginning communication, so that would be simpler for the staff to do in terms of that, because oftentimes some of the practices would be very similar. And when we're looking at kind of universal, we're looking at everyone, and then we're looking at who doesn't respond to those interventions that, in fact, we could look at in terms of having more individualized and intensive interventions. So this is really in the school area that we've seen improvement in individual social emotional competence, social and academic outcomes for students with disabilities. Oftentimes our individuals are subject to being bullied, so we're really looking at in terms of reducing bullying behaviors as well, reducing exclusionary discipline, which might be with some of the individuals we serve. It may be in terms of physical management, in terms of that restraint and seclusion. And then on the staff outcomes, we're really looking at in terms of agency and school organizational health and school climate. And all these studies are group comparison. So taking certain schools in terms of what they're doing versus other schools that are not implementing PBS with fidelity, looking at fidelity as compared to not fidelity. And we see these types of outcomes. And we have other outcomes that really look at specifically with students with disabilities, which if you go on the PBIS.org website, you'll see that brief there. We're also big into equity, so we really have done a lot of research in terms of looking at equity for all students in terms of these types of outcomes.
Great. Yeah.
So that answer your question, Leo? That was a great question.
It did, and I also say, Assistant Commissioner George said that there's been improvement. A handful of providers have reported increased satisfaction of staff and reduced workers' comp costs as well. Not a little thing either, right?
Right.
Yeah,
And I really have to give a big shout out to Commissioner George. She's been the leader of this. This is really taken like 10 years to get to this point in time, that they've been working on PBS regulations during all the time. They get provider outcome input and advocate input and a variety of other folks along those lines to come up with the regulations to that would really guide the department over the next 10 years.
in your work with the schools, especially the high schools, maybe and middle schools,
Yeah.
have you, one of the questions that Diane asked, did you see it in addition to reduction of other issues, reduction in medications to address behaviors? Was this ever measured in some of your work in other states? I'm assuming it's too early in Massachusetts with adults.
Yeah, I don't know of work in that area. My assumption would be, and we've never tracked it really, but if you have students that have less behavior problems, that hopefully the psychopharmacology folks are actually looking at that and decreasing medication. I know in terms of my individual work, I've worked hard to try to get individuals off medication because oftentimes it really doesn't work. In some cases, people just continue to pile on medication after medication. So we're strong advocates for using medication wisely in terms of that in the least amount.
Sounds like it would be a good either master's or PhD paper, dissertation rather, since it might be too much work for just a paper, but for the future.
Yes, Leo. And I'll take your suggestion and bring it back to my folks.
Okay.
So, so this is what we probably see. People have seen the triangle before. So when we look at tier one, we talk about what everyone needs. So if we look at everyone needs to be able to advocate for themselves, right? Or everyone needs to be well, or everyone needs to be happy. And the goal would be, okay, how would we potentially measure that? And how would we look at screening the whole population in terms of those things? And then what would be kind of a universal intervention that we would look at in terms of improving those outcomes? And you can see inside the triangle is what we would look at as our problem solving model, which is kind of what's the problem, how would we operationally define the problem, how do we analyze why it's occurring, how do we then not implement a plan, how do we evaluate the plan to see whether it actually improved what's going on. And this would be the decision-making framework for both the tier one or tier two, which is kind of what do some need. So that maybe we may have very special limited communicators in our organization that needs a little bit more than just tier one. And then we may have some really challenging behavior or very challenging communication needs that we would look at in terms of, or we may have people, as if you're looking at in terms of happiness, we may have overall, most people are, but some people, may be slightly depressed and some people may be severely depressed. And what we need to do is address those within those tiers. So this is, if I go back here, this is one of our tattoos that we offer. If people really understand this, they understand PBS. And this is another one of our tattoos, which is those concentric circles, right? That we're really looking at what would be the social, emotional, behavioral competence. Those are our outcomes that would be defined by your organization or your school. And then we're really looking at everyone can really talk about the practices. That's what the staff see and the individuals see. But oftentimes there's really no data that we're looking at to make some decisions in terms of whether, whether those outcomes are being achieved. And kind of the two sources of data would be individual outcomes or staff outcomes, as well as fidelity, right? We would be wanting to look like, do we have fidelity with whatever we've chosen? And then on the other hand, probably the biggest difference is the systems, which is the representative teams with stakeholders on those teams, right? That with administrators that would meet probably like at least monthly to look at the data and to problem solve in terms of whether they're moving in the right direction, and if not, how do they begin to change their action plan. And then the other thing we try to look at is what we call a coach, which the department would look at in terms of training, kind of more in depth to help coach the team and the agency around this process. So that triangle I just showed you in this concentric diagram are kind of our two, what we call our tattoos, that if people understand this, then basically they understand PBS, because oftentimes they just think of it as practices, and really we're looking at that systems change that includes systems in data. So when we look at tier 1, right, we're looking at those systems, right, as you just saw in terms of that, what are our systems, what are our data for all individuals, what are the practices we would have for all individuals across all settings, and they really establish a foundation for positive and proactive support. So these would be some probably kind of universal practices. One we would look at collaborating with the individuals, families, and staff to develop what are the school program-wide expectations that we would like everyone to be kind, would like to advocate for themselves, and how do we look at prioritizing those appropriate social, emotional, and behavioral skills, and then how do we go about teaching those expectations in terms of both, how to advocate for yourself, to set up individuals for success. And then how do we encourage and acknowledge those expected behaviors? And then really important is how do we prevent and respond to unwanted behavior in a respectful instructional manner rather than in a consequential manner, right? These would be, if you look at across both the adult services and the school services, what we would be looking for in terms of universal supports. And really fostering both a school program family partnerships. So we really think families really should be part of this to be able to advocate. And at high schools, Leo, and particularly middle schools, we think the kids should be involved in this as well. And adults, we would like them to be involved in terms of kind of figuring out what's important for them, what's meaningful for them. So this would be.
Bob, I just want to do a time check. We're at 12, almost 12:40, but no pressure, but I just.
All right. Okay, we're going. We're doing okay.
Okay,
Doing
good.
okay. Thanks, Leo, for the reminder. Right. So one, as I said, would be kind of a common approach to discipline. Clearly expected behavior. What's our procedures for teaching expected behavior? What's our procedures for encouraging? Procedures for discouraging problem behavior. And then importantly, record keeping and decision making. So here's an example from a school. Right, does this meet our expectations for our expectations? Right, this is much better. Right, instead of the no, we have a yes. Right, there's another one here. The schools we work with oftentimes love acronyms, so they develop something along those lines. Right, and then we get to tier 2. Right. So we're looking at additional instruction and practices, right? Increasing adult support and supervision, more opportunities for positive reinforcement, reminders of prompts, increasing school family communication. And then we're going to get to tier 3, which is more intensive individualized support. And really tier 2 and tier 3 are built on tier 1. And because oftentimes these when we work at kind of the traditional way, they're not connected. The goals we're really looking at in terms of it, that we want to make sure that individuals have access to tier 1 supports and tier 2 supports before we're looking at tier 3. Right. So at tier 3, we're looking at individual functional behavioral assessments. We may potentially wrap around and person-centered planning, implementing individualized and comprehensive function-based support. So what if you're a family member, right? What can you do to support? So, If they say yes, right, kind of what are your expectations for the individuals you serve? What's your acknowledgement system to, and that usually we're looking at both for acknowledgement system for individuals served as well as staff. Because when we look at this, we're the expectations the staff are doing this. So we would both like to have an acknowledgement system for staff. And oftentimes our staff really don't get acknowledged very well. Do you measure fidelity? You know, and you could actually volunteer to serve on their tier 1 team or help them implement tier 1. And if not, why not? Right? And can I help you get freely available resources? Right. So here's a few free resources. So we have the Association for Positive Behavior Support, PBIS, which has a number of videos that talk about in terms of what positive behavior support would be at home or in the school, right? Or in the community. So these are really brief videos, but I think are really cool in terms of both for your own knowledge as well if you want to share with other people, right? And then we have what's called the Home Community Positive Behavior Support Network. Again, this has a lot of information around positive behavior support, has a variety of different resources. On this site, you can get a free subscription to the Parenting Special Needs magazine that provides articles you can listen to at the National Technical Assistance Center for PBS. Right, this is your tax dollars at work. Right, they have one strengthening family participation, addressing behavior in an IEP. Another one on questions for families to consider when concerned about their child's behavior. Helping your family prepare for an IEP meeting. Enhancing family school collaboration with diverse families. Most of this is for school-age population because this is funded by the U.S. Department of Education rather than by an adult disabilities organization. Right? Or another place to get some resources from is the National Autism Center at the May Institute. Right? And the National Autism Center did several big research projects looking at all of the research in the area of autism spectrum disorder. So if you go on Google and you put what works in ASD or autism spectrum, you probably get about 2 million hits. This really helps families and educators be able to determine what actually works in the area of autism spectrum disorder. Also, they have several manuals, Parents Guide to Evidence-Based Practice in Autism, as well as on the 4th Wednesday of the month from 5:15 to 6:30, there is a free virtual autism training series as well. So I think I did okay time-wise, Leo. I think we got some time for questions.
Yeah, awesome. And I just want to say, you sort of showed ways that these concepts get translated, right? But you know, for people, like, it's not like you can give a generic, you know, translation of this, right? It's based on individuals, the staff, and then the entity, right? The systems change piece.
Right.
So if someone needs it in their ISP, you know, it's not like, you know, you can say, oh, here it is. Here's a model ISP thing. No, it means looking at, right, what the person's journey is like and sort of translating these concepts, right?
Right. So there isn't, as I said before, there isn't a curriculum, you know, or manual. This is when you look at tier 1 is developed organically based on the system. So if you're looking at your individual ISP and you're saying, this is what I want my son or daughter to do, one of the goals you should be looking at is, does the organization really promote similar things in terms of what you would like your son or daughter to do in terms of their ISP? Because it works much better if the organization supports what you're doing as an organization than just as a one-off. And so the department really has been moving to try to say, we need to look at the system rather than each individual. And, you know, obviously every individual needs, you know, certain things along those lines that are specific to them. But if, you know, we want to look at improving community participation, if the organization is committed to community participation, it's much easier to say, okay, how are we going to enhance that in my son or daughter's IEP, ISP, or, you know, we're really looking at happiness. And so if the organization is committed to happiness as an organizational perspective, and they're actually taking some data, and there really is some tools that actually measure happiness for individuals like ourselves and individuals with IDD. It's oftentimes not much different. You know, that they're actually using those things systemically rather than just for individuals, that to the extent that they can look at how do we aggregate this to really make sure that all rowing the same on the same oar in the same way, because that really, you know, makes it more efficient and more effective for everyone.
Before I share Lucy's question / comment about what she sees in schools, I wanted to add to this, like when you are trying to get this going, even though it has to be systemically viewed, you may start with a team in a adult services program, right? You
Right.
introducing it. You want to share a little bit about that? Because otherwise, yeah, go ahead. I mean, I think you got the question.
So if we're looking at systems change, oftentimes the way we usually start off is kind of who's interested, right? From there in terms of that, and can we do a little pilot in terms of one of the programs to really work in terms of, you know, work the kinks out for the organization in terms of that. So yeah, it's, you know, the big thing is probably the administration needs to be committed to this because it's systems change, which is probably from a clinical kind of perspective. We haven't really had the regulations that basically say the administration needs to be on board. The administration needs to be participating in the training and in the meetings, so that the administration really looks at in terms of you know, how we can support in terms of what's going on in terms of improving quality of life. So oftentimes we start off with a little pilot and build it from there. But at this point in time, the organization serving adults or anyone with IDD, DDS money needs to begin going down the pathway. They're looking at this as a multi-year project, but their goal is, at least the beginning, they have a leadership team who's meeting, who's beginning to look at some data, who's beginning to look at an action plan. So it's, you know, that's the direction of the department. They're a couple of years behind in terms of where they wanted to be because of COVID, but that's the direction they're going.
So the correction is, yes, you can do a pilot, but make sure the administration's on board and starts to look at it right from the beginning systemically. So they're building in those behaviors and that value, the commitment.
Right.
So Lucy said, often I see schools providing inappropriate educational services, which causes inappropriate student behavior. What to do? The student is reacting. You were sort of getting at that with your presentation, I would say, right? It's the frustration she's feeling of what happens at that tier 1 level, right?
Right. Yeah. Oftentimes schools are because they don't know better, they're into punitive, exclusionary, reactive discipline to handle their behavior problems. And what we've seen is not very effective. In fact, it exacerbates the problem behaviors. And really the goal is, you know, can we switch? I kind of went over that slide pretty quickly. Can we switch it to a much more from a reactive, punitive, and exclusionary model to the commitment of the school to a positive, proactive, and inclusionary model in terms of that. And the other thing is really looking at in terms of kind of, you know, a way to teach all the kids to be respectful, right? That the goal would be, do we have lesson plans that really teaches the students to be respectable? And then is anybody acknowledging that, right? In terms of that, so that, you know, kids know that pays off. And most kids basically, you know, just kind of learn by osmosis, but some of the kids, particularly with disabilities, need a little bit more to the extent the culture is moving towards a positive, proactive and preventative type of system. It works for all. So it's, I would agree with, it's Lucy, I would agree with Lucy. That's a lot of times what we see, but I can really show you some schools that have really turned it around and, you know, have made huge differences in terms of students' wellness, as well as in terms of students really being able to be on task and engaged in their classrooms. And that's some of both the work we do and the research we do.
And let me share, I have two more chats. Pat Carney, I like to start with the team approach. The infrastructure to support systems change seems really complicated, which I fear will result in over clinicalizing or under planning for system change. Have you seen either of these?
Well, I think one of the things we try to do is kind of de-clinicalize, like tier one is really all about staff behavior. That's what we're talking about, is how do we change staff behavior to both look at kind of how do we teach the students in terms of how to behave and have appropriate social skills, which is a life skill, right, in terms of that. And then, you know, how do we figure out an acknowledgement system that's both culturally appropriately and developmentally appropriate, because it's certainly going to be different from kindergartens and to high schools. In terms of that, is, you know, how do we bring more student voice and family voice in terms of the system? So it really requires a commitment from the administration. If I'm going to say one thing, it's basically, if you don't have administrative commitment, it's not going to happen. The other thing I find is people, this is not a do-it-yourself project. That usually you need to have some technical assistance that can help you through the project, because I've worked with a number of schools that said, oh, we'll do it ourselves. And then 15 years later, they're still at the same point in terms of what it is. And there is support through or gaining support through DDS to try to provide some support for agencies. And the Department of DESE also provides a PBIS Academy for schools. So, but as you go up the tiers, we're really looking at kind of a more clinicalization that we're really looking at in terms of, do people have the skills to work with individuals that are depressed in terms of evidence-based practices or anxiety or other types of problems? Do they really have, one of the things we often find is people really aren't well trained in functional behavioral assessment, so they then don't come up with really good behavior support plans. So, you know, clearly as you go up the tiers, we're looking at more staff expertise in terms of how do we support the individuals that need additional individualized and more intensive support.
And then Todd asks, Robert, and this will be the last question, is there a larger group / list of universal supports that organizations should consider when setting their own PBS programs?
So I think, you know, one, we tend to look at the, you know, one is starting off with a plan like I've outlined in terms of kind of what's your outcomes in terms of that. What outcomes do you want to have for the individuals you serve, right? And then from there would be, you know, what are the expectations for those to achieve some of those outcomes in terms of that, and, you know, how do you go about teaching those things? So really, it comes from what the agency wants, or the school would say they're meaningful, both kind of academic on the basically on the school side, or functional skills on the adult side, and then on the other end would be, you know, what are the things we think it's important for the people that we serve to be able to. So it may be community skills, right? How do we build so for a more effective community integration? Well, you know, how do we do that for all the individuals that we serve? Would be kind of basic skills that we think would make a difference. And then from there would be how are we teaching those skills, and how are we acknowledging those skills? So, you know, it depends in terms of what your outcomes would be, how you would drive it. And you could not follow that at all. You could say our universal interventions are this. The question comes down to is, how do you measure what you want to do, and is that making a difference in terms of the people that you serve, right? So
And that's the tier one. I mean, your point is,
yeah,
tier
tier one.
that's grappling with that tier one mission. And then for tier two, again, there's not really, you know, and by the way, you've set those general areas in your presentation already, right? You had
right.
buckets. And those buckets are pretty expansive. You know, you could fit what your agency's goal is within that bucket. You might be more specific, but then for tier 2 and then later tier 3, it's more customized, right? Because you're looking at, it almost dictates to you, where you want to go. Is that fair to say or not?
Yeah, and usually one way to look at it would be is those individuals who need tier 2 are those individuals who are not responsive to our universal interventions. And then those who need tier 3, more individualized intensive, are not responsive to tier 1 and tier 2. What we find oftentimes is agencies and schools go automatically to tier 3 without basically looking at whether the tier 1 and the tier 2 interventions were actually in place, right? So the goal is really efficiency, right? So to the extent that basically we have more effective tier 1 interventions, we're going to have less individuals that need tier 2 interventions and less individuals that need tier 3 interventions. So that's really the goal, is the more effective our tier 1 interventions, the less individuals. And we see that in schools all the time, that if they have effective tier 1 interventions, they have a lot less kids who basically need to have tier 2 interventions. And the nice thing is this is customizable. It's a framework, right? That's the other F word. It's a framework, right? That you can put whatever you want in the framework. The goal would be, what's your meaningful data that you're looking for your individuals served, and how do you have that the systems in place for that representative team that's really looking at the data to say, are we moving in the right direction? So the nice thing about it, I go back and say it's a framework, so you can do kind of whatever you want within that framework to gain those meaningful goals and objectives.
This is Bob, this is great. And honestly, I know we talked about you doing some other stuff, but I'll tell you what hit me about today. Like, we could do 2 different sessions off of this, one about tier 1 and invite like 2 or 3 agency heads or COOs or, you know what I mean? Sort of whatever that could sit in and you sort of walk through with them. Sort of what's their mission going to look like using this, and what is their focus? And people can get a real live experience of that. And then the second session down the road, or maybe before the bigger one, but maybe it makes sense to do tier 1 first, is to then look at a couple of examples. So we could have some of our friends here and frequent attendees like Caroline or others. Carolyn, I'm sorry I said Caroline, just shoot me. But she could talk about her, the ISP strategy, right? And talking about what people are experiencing and sort of how this plays in the framework for individualized way, right? Because there's really no way to do it out of that context, right? And based on what you're telling us, it's a framework. So if you're up for that.
It's customized to every school, and it's customized to every organization. I mean, the nice thing about it is nobody's telling you what to do. We're just telling you to use the framework, right? That's what it is. And, you decide, what's the meaningful outcomes for kind of the most of the people you serve. And then really have some way to measure that and some way to figure out. It's a continuous improvement process. That's really what we're looking at.
And Carrie threw something on the table, the devil. She just complicated our lives a little bit in a good way. she threw on the table, and Janet beat me to it. Janet said there's a relationship. So she threw Charting the Life course as a framework. And it's in a related framework. It's actually, you could use both frameworks. And that's what George just said to everyone. There's a relationship, because you could use Charting the Life course, right? In terms of figuring out what some of those things are that you want to then embed into PBIS, right? So pretty cool. You guys, I think we got something going here. We're going to have everybody show up again at these next 2. And, but if you're up for that, we'll talk offline, of course.
Yeah,
and by the way, it's been 38 years or 37 years that we know. So, but
you still look the same. I don't.
You hot ticket. All right. Well,
so, and the other thing I'd say is, the goal is improving people's relationships. So again, that might be something that we're looking at from an organizational perspective, is how do we improve people's relationships, right? And the nice thing, it's not all about behavior. It's really all about, wellness and relationships. And, the goal would be teach people skills so they don't have to, they can make good choices, and the staff can make good choices in supporting them.
Excellent. Hey, Bob, just what an awesome pleasure to have you with us. What informative, and I think it was very approachable. So I just want to thank you, and we're going to try to do a good. We're not even going to edit this probably. We're just going to post it up there, but in a day or two, you'll get me a PDF copy just as it is, if you're fine with that, and we'll get it out to everyone.
Yeah, that's fine. That's good. I'll send it to you by the end of the day.
And what we'll do is I want to send it when we put the link up, because people then can encourage people to also visit the link. And on the chat, we put up a whole bunch of those resources as you described them. So anyone, if you can save your chats before we hang this up, do it. I did. And we can include the chat actually when we send out that information, so people can copy and paste the websites, including mayinstitute.org. You can find the National Autism Center on mayinstitute.org. So I included that website as well.
And
So,
Leo, I'm going to send this not as a PDF. I'm going to just send this as a PowerPoint. So
okay.
people can link. I think they can link to what I have up there.
Off the PowerPoint, they can at least copy and paste easily if they can,
fine.
right?
Yeah.
Yeah. All right. Well, Bob, again, thank you. Thanks everybody for being on. Great to see you guys. Next month, we're going to do something on Macy, not May, right? Macy, right? Is that what you set up, Kerry? Or Maura set it up? Yeah, something about clearly higher education, totally different. That's people who went through PBIS and Charting Life course and decided to go to higher education. See, so that'll be the topic next month, and we'll look forward to continuing, and eventually we'll get the podcast going too. So thank you, Bob, and talk to you soon, and everybody else. Thank you for being with us, and a shout out to Chris Peltier if he's still on. I know he probably saw your topic and came on, but he's somebody that's doing a lot of work in the schools as well. So take care. Have a great day, everybody.
Thanks for everybody for the questions and comments. I just checked. We had like 39 of them, which is pretty amazing.
Is that on the chat?
Yeah.
Yeah, cool. And we had 60 people at one point. So people were very interested. So, all right. Thank you. And see you, everybody. Take care.
Bye-bye.
Bye.